Welcome. Okay. Where's Carlos?
And then at the key moment.
Toma. How do we turn on the microphone?
I'm sorry?
How do we turn on this microphone? Oh, okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Do they want us to use this? Okay. So who do I look at? Who do I look at to get them to turn it on? Sorry to be.
AV person, right there, that guy.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Oh, the sound I was hearing is just this, walking across. Can you, good. All right, everyone. Cosyne 2024, welcome to Lisbon. I have one job right now, and that's to introduce Tony. Here's Tony.
And thank you for that warm and kind introduction. So this is the 20th anniversary of Cosyne, and yay! Woo! And I just thought, how many of you were at the first Cosyne in 2004? Raise your hand. Woo! Wow, like 7 people. Yeah. So the first Cosyne was at Cold Spring Harbor 20 years ago, and it was about 175 people in a room half this size or a quarter this size and 1/3 occupied. But it has blossomed into a great ski meeting. I certainly recommend that you go to the ski workshops after the main meeting. I hope you all brought your skis. There's really, it really is gratifying to those of us who were at the very first Cosynes and the meetings before that to see how this community has grown. So somebody asked whether I had imagined that at the first meeting that it would ever grow to, what is it, over like 1,200 people now, and certainly not. We sort of were surprised that it even took off the way it did. So it's been super fun and exciting. But really, my primary goal here is to thank the people who are actually doing the hard work, because those of us who originally were doing it no longer do very much for it. Alex, I'm looking at you. Chand and Bing, who are back there, did an amazing job with an unprecedented number of abstracts, putting together a fantastic program. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to them.
Hi, so my name is Bing Brunton. I'm at the University of Washington in Seattle.
I'm Chandramouli Chandrasekaran. I always go by Chand. No one can pronounce my name usually. And I'm at the Boston University. I'm an assistant professor there.
Yeah, we're super happy to be here and to show off what we've put together for you as a scientific program. But before we start talking about what we have for this year, Tony has already talked about how this is the 20th anniversary, and so we thought we'd just give you a little taste what it would have been like if you were a participant in the original 2002 Cosyne. And so, like this year, you may have started out by trying to write an abstract of some kind to submit to the conference, right? I dug this up from the internet's back brain. There was a LaTeX template for the Cosyne 2024. Okay, here's what it looked like. That's it. Super simple. It was not double-blind back then. And importantly, there's a set of instructions here telling you that whatever you want to put in the program book, put it right here. It could go on for a few paragraphs. So back then, there was not that like last-minute thing where you're just like, oh, it's three lines over the page limit, and you're trying to edit it down. It could go on for a few paragraphs. That was okay. If you showed up at the conference, and as Tony already said, it was a more intimate environment. So here's a couple of pictures that they shared with us from the first Cosyne. Here is Manish talking to Tony. They look exactly the same, by the way. And all we can gather is that Manish is definitely drawing some kind of action potential, okay? The other thing he's drawing could be a manifold, could be some kind of dynamical system, we're not really sure, but whatever it was, it looked really serious, because you can tell because they're holding drinks, so it's a really serious conversation. Okay. Here's another one, Alex Bouget talking to Tomasz at the poster. No, so I'm sorry. John Spiral, I'm sorry. And they're having a really serious conversation, looking very, very skeptical. So this is a look that you should get used to going forward, going to the poster presentations as well. So it's a what poster? It's a Tony Zader poster. So that's why they were looking so serious and skeptical. You'll also notice that there was a dress code. Everyone had to wear black. Okay, so there were some similarities between that conference and this one, but there's a lot of differences as well. I think the biggest difference is all of you here, okay? The registration's been going up, so as of today, we have 1,365 registrants at the main meeting, slightly fewer at the workshops when we transition to Cash in a couple of days. So I'm gonna try an interactive exercise here. We'll see what can go wrong. It's gonna be fine, right? I'm gonna just ask everyone to take a couple of, let's say, take tens of seconds and introduce yourself to somebody who is next to you that you may not already know. Please share your name, and then maybe share what was your first Cosyne. Maybe this is your first Cosyne, maybe you first came 10 years ago. Take a few seconds to introduce yourself to each other. About 10 seconds. Okay, I'm going to ask everyone to come back together. Hopefully you've met some new friends and have some memories that you might like to share. May I ask, could you raise your hand if this is the first ever Cosyne that you're attending?
Yeah.
Welcome. Thank you all for being here. I will share one of my first Cosyne memories. I think Cosyne was the first conference where I ever gave a talk as a graduate student at a conference. So this conference means a lot to me. This community has meant a lot to me, and so it especially means a lot to me that I'm here serving this role this year. So we smashed the records by basically every metric you can imagine, not only in the number of attendees, but also in the number of abstracts that were submitted, the numbers of posters and talks that we were able to include in the scientific program. All of this also involved the largest program committee that's ever been assembled and the largest number of reviewers who volunteered their time to do all of the double-blind reviews. So thank you all for the service. This is the reason that this can happen at all. Thank you, all of you. So Leslie and Sean pulled together in the last 2 hours to make this graph. This would not be Cosyne if we didn't put in one last graph in the last hour, right? And so they were able to pull together the numbers. The first conference had 175 attendees. Okay, so here's the plot of the rise and rise of Cosyne. There was sort of a linear growth phase. I think in the early days of Salt Lake City and Snowbird. I think there was a plateau, which likely corresponded to the Utah plateau. You know. I think it started growing again when the conference moved to Colorado for a few years, and that giant jump you see, the first one there, is the first time it was here in Lisbon. We have now surpassed that record this year as well by coming back to Lisbon. Okay, so I'm going to give you, especially for those of you who are maybe new to the conference, you're not used to there's a general pace of Cosyne, the main program, before we go to the tutorials, the workshops. And so the pace is that we're here right now on Thursday evening. There's going to be a keynote talk by Lars Chittka, followed by the first poster session. We made a decision this year to move the rest of the poster sessions. Instead of having the traditional late evening poster sessions, they're actually going to be in the early afternoons in days 2 and 3. The reason we did this was at the suggestion of Zach Manin, who suggested that to accommodate Southern European dining habits, that we end the conference a little, we can go a little longer because people don't eat dinner until later, but this way nobody has to come back. So hopefully this will increase attendance at the poster sessions. And to keep everyone fueled for spirited scientific conversations, we'll also be serving a light lunch at the poster sessions as well. Okay? So you'll see that the remainder of the schedule is here. We've roughly tried to group the contributed talks by theme, and each of the sessions of talks will be headlined by an invited speaker. I've already highlighted the keynote here by Lars Chittka. We'll see that very shortly this evening. Tomorrow morning, we're going to have 2 20th anniversary perspective talks that are going to be a little more backward-looking and also forward-looking at the intersection of the history of computational and systems neuroscience, followed by a bunch of really exciting invited talks. And the last talk of Sunday is actually going to be a DEI-focused talk by Kei Tai on evolving a toxic hierarchy into sustainable ecosystem. That DEI talk is also going to be followed by the DEI luncheon. I think there was a sign up, and so hopefully people, you know if you're signed up for it. Okay? That is going to be the end of the main program, and then Sunday afternoon we will all transition. Those of us who are going to the workshop will transition to the workshops in Kashkash. Okay, so I've already highlighted some of the events. There's a couple of more fun things that are going on this year that are new. There's a Cosyne retrospective gallery that's a couple of cool art posters that should be up in Pavilion 3, which is where all of the poster sessions are going to be as well. Adam Charles made a couple of really cool models and model systems chess sets that are 3D printed. They're kind of awesome. So there's going to be mini chess tournaments and a couple of other games that are going to be going on throughout the conference. They're going to be next to where you picked up your registration. That's where the location of the games will be. Okay? Tomorrow on Friday, so in the morning, we'll have the anniversary perspective talks. In the evening, there will be a panel discussion on neuro and AI moderated by Paul Middlebrooks. And following that, there will be a Simons Foundation-sponsored social. Okay, I'm going to hand it off to Sean now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Bing. That was wonderful. And, you know, in 2005, we had 5 members of the program committee, right? That was like, I think, 5 of Tony's friends and all the, you know, the people he was closest to with, right? Since then, it's just like grown and grown and grown, right? In the early 2011, 2012, it was like 21 members. Last year was like 53 members. This year we had 57 PC members. And Bing and I tried really hard to recruit program committee members from a wide diversity of career stages, right? So late stage postdocs, early investigators and senior investigators, so that it could feel inclusive and everyone could participate in this amazing conference. Like as Bing said, I've also grown up with this conference to like guide my thinking in computational systems neuroscience. We also try to include people from all over the world. You know, like a majority of the people came from the United States, but a lot of program committee members came from Europe and Asia, including India and China. And so how did we actually pick the abstracts that have made up the final program, right? So as Bing said, we received a record number of abstracts. Like that's what Tomasz told us. We had 1,104 abstracts, and which was like, when I first heard that, I was like, oh my God, right? Like that's a lot of abstracts, right? Fortunately, we had 57 PC members. And thank you all for so much hard work and identifying the reviewers. we had 352 reviewers to help us with these abstract evaluations. We did the paper review matching to get like 3,314 reviews. Every single abstract received at least 3 reviews, which I think is like one of the first few times has ever happened in the history of this conference. A couple of them got even 4 reviews. And once we had those, we created the weighted score. Each reviewer provided us with a confidence score along with a score. And then we identified 570 selected presentations in total, and with 28 waitlisted. And then, again, to select the final set of talks out of these 60 possible talks, we asked the program committee members to vote on the 30 most that they would like to see at the conference. And so that's how we made up the final program. Right? So just by the numbers, we had like 3,314 reviews. So the blue bar graph shows you the raw scores, all the 3,314, and the orange ones show you the weighted scores, and you can see there's a lot of membership around 6 and 7. And again, like there was a wide diversity of scores from 4 to 7, and also standard deviation of the scores. So how did we actually select it? Obviously there were some abstracts which were above like a percentile level, and there was some at the border between 5.7 and 6.2, which was what you had to get. And these were, we chose based on additional criteria for enhancing the scientific and the intellectual diversity of the meeting, okay? This is like the statistics of how, we had self-reported author identity. It's not a complete data set. And this is what the numbers seem to be pretty stable across years. And I will just put up this graph, and people can interpret it as they wish to interpret it, okay? The good news is, there's no real difference between scores as a function of self-reported author identity. And I think this was in 2020 when we moved to a double-blind review system. And so as far as we can see from these kinds of things, stuff seems to be working, which is really good news, right? And I don't have perfect data for it, but the abstracts which showed up between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. were like some of the lowest ranked abstracts. And I think that happened both in European time and in the US time, right? So those last, somebody clicking submit at 2:59 a.m. PST, it's a wish and a prayer or whatever it is, right? So it's like a hope, a wish, a prayer, that kind of thing, right? So those were like around the 5s often, right? So late night abstract writing probably doesn't succeed, right? So what is the zeitgeist? What is the most popular keywords for this year, right? So population coding, decision making, and recurrent neural networks made it into a lot of the initial submitted abstracts. And then eventually in the accepted abstracts, we had deep networks, population coding, recurrent neural networks. I think Krishna, my late mentor, would be very happy to see some of these things. And I just want to give a shout out to him as well. I don't know if this is the right place, but Krishna, had a big influence on these things. I will hand over to Bing for a second. Yeah.
So, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. We've already have the distinction of standing up in front of you. And just because we're the ones standing up here doesn't mean that we actually did all of the work. There was a tremendous team of volunteers who spent all of their efforts towards making the scientific program possible, making this conference possible. So we just wanted to give a shout out to everyone who volunteered their time, including the general co-chairs, Jess Carden and Blake Richards, all of the various chairs of the subcommittees, doing things like fundraising, taking care of the tutorials, doing the workshops, assigning all of the various travel awards that were handed out. And of course, we wanted to thank the executive committee, many of whom are sitting in the front row over here, for all of the last minute decision making and guidance and making sure that we didn't go off the rails on this meeting, just because it's always our first time doing it, but you've been doing it a lot.
Yeah. This meeting would not happen without 2 very special people who gave many, many, many hours, right? So Leslie Weeks, she's the conference manager. I'm sure you've seen her around. She's like a fixer extraordinaire, and is just so responsive and if you're all able to be here and listen to us talk today, Leslie made this happen. And if you have posters to present today and your abstracts and the HOVA app and the program book and all of those things, it's a huge shout out to Tomasz Hromadka, right? Tomasz Hromadka, yeah. So I hope I got that right. And so we wanted to thank both of them because they did an incredible job. And they were we interacted with them on a minute by minute basis when putting together this stuff, right, on Slack, okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tomasz.
Thank you.
And with that, I think we can move on to our keynote.
Sorry. Yeah. How much time do I have? Is it 1 hour or 45 minutes? 1 hour including discussion? Okay, so a bit shorter than one. Okay.
Okay. While he's... Okay. I don't know who... Nobody can hear me, right? Okay. I forgot where the... We're good? Okay. All right. I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker this evening, Professor Lars Chittka from the Queen Mary University of London. Lars is... Do you need... You're good. Okay. We invited Lars in large part because this is not his usual crowd. I think that is something that is really delightful to start a computational systems neuroscience conference with somebody who is hopefully going to show us something that we don't normally think about. So Lars is a world-renowned neuroethologist and sensory physiologist and ecologist, and thinks a lot about the evolution and cognition and decision-making in insects, particularly bees. Through a series of really clever experiments over many, many years, he's shown that bees have just absolutely astonishing capabilities of doing things that we think of as being kind of special to humans, like being able to make decisions, being able to have social behavior and cognition. And so he's also written a book called The Mind of a Bee. You'll see it, there's a couple of posters scattered around. I think he's brought a couple of copies here. And this is also the title of his talk today. So please join me in welcoming Professor Lars Chittka.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Am I audible enough? Good. All right, yeah, we need some sound later in some of the videos. Here we go. Cool. All right, thank you. All right, good evening, everybody. So I've researched the sensory capabilities, the perception, and yes, the learning abilities of bees for decades. But how on earth did I recently start to refer to the mind of an insect? Surely that's a little strange. So I'll try my best to give you an explanation. So what I'll talk to you about today is an actual exploration of whether bees could meaningfully be called to have minds or be conscious beings. And by that, I mean that that I'll explore whether they have mental representations of things and of space and of things in space and number also. I want to ask if they have access to the future. That almost went wrong. Let me see if I can stabilize this a little bit. Okay, let's see. Let's hope it stays there. Whether they have access to at least the immediate future and some appreciation of the outcomes of their own actions, but also whether they can look into the past in a flexible manner. I want to explore whether they can manipulate objects at some bare bones level could be called tool use. And I'll occasionally say something computational, just as a little nod to you guys. Not that our computations reveal very much about how bees do any of these clever things, but I'll try my best. Now, for those of you not familiar with the world of bees, first of all, it's important to realize that much of their life is dictated by flower visitation. And in that domain, the first conspicuous thing, of course, is that they see flowers, completely different from how we do. They have ultraviolet receptors, which we do not. So this is, I guess, a healthy reminder that the world we see is not the physical or the real world, it's just filtered through the particular filter sensory organs that we have acquired through evolution, and bees have different ones. The other thing that's important to keep in mind about a bee's world and its priorities is that everything is dictated by having to be an economic shopper in the flower supermarket. That is, in any bee's flight range, up to 5-10 kilometers away from their hive, there might be several dozen flower species, all differing in nectar contents and pollen and so on. And bees have to remember these floral signals that we're seeing here as predictors of rewards. So they have to find the flowers with the best cost-benefit ratio, then disregard others and focus their attention on the ones that they've identified as most rewarding. And in a sense, we merely capitalize on bees' abilities to associate almost anything with sugar rewards. Do we have a pointer? If not, I'll sort of try to jump up and down without my laptop falling off the stage. So what you can see on the top there in panel B is a bee about to land on a little platform in front of an image of a human face. And on that platform is a little drop of sugar water. And she does that a few times, and then we take the sugar water away, present the bees with basically the equivalent of a crime witness test, several different images of human faces, and ask her how well she can identify the one that's she's previously had next to a reward. And it turns out, bottom left, that with most pairs of faces, even quite similar ones, bees are quite good at identifying the correct face. Now, that doesn't actually mean that bees recognize these things as faces. To my mind, this is, to a bee, that's just a strange flower. It's a pattern that's associated with a reward. It's just to illustrate the flexibility that bees have in learning almost any kind of thing, a pattern, but also activities, so long as there's a sugar reward at the end. Now, obviously, bees have to recognize flowers and be good at it. What we see here on the right is a simulation of how bees view a flower through their curved eyes. And it seems obvious, perhaps, that they must be good at somehow storing images of flowers. But as we'll see in a moment, you can actually capture the essence of a flower with fairly simple feature detectors, without actually any kind of mental representation. A brief introduction to the beauty of a bee brain. So here's a frontal view of a bee's head. These areas shown in various shades of blue are the visual ganglia, lamina, medulla, and lobula. Small as they are, in an insect visual system, there are actually more neuron types than there are in a human retina. So in flies, it's about 120 different types of neurons in the visual ganglia, and in bees, it doesn't seem to be less. And these structures at the top there are the mushroom bodies, which are centers of multisensory integration and learning and memory. Now, in the lobula, the third ganglion here, there are two types of fairly simple feature detectors. These are edge detectors that respond most strongly to edges in that direction or that direction. Very simple. And they're large field feature detectors that detect such edge orientations across entire eye regions. So what we did here is we built a fairly simple model starting with the retina on the left and the lamina, some small field feature detectors in the medulla, and then these edge detectors in the lobula with a very low number. These are just 4 edge detectors, and then wire these up with the Kenyan cells in the mushroom bodies. The mushroom bodies, recall, are the areas where bees store their memories. And what we're seeing here is the correlation between how well our model predicts a bee can discriminate various patterns and how well the bees really do it. So these are the kinds of patterns that we used. We used a large database from the literature. In this case, these are data from Xiaowu Zhang and Adrian Horridge, and you can see all of these patterns. Some of them are quite similar, but bees can discriminate them to various degrees. And what you might expect, what modelers are usually proud of, is if all their dots are on the line. Great, my model mimics what I see in nature. Oh, fantastic, thank you very much. But that's not what happens. So we didn't actually tweak our model at all. So you shouldn't do that, of course. If you're tweaking your model to mimic what you know from empirical science, then that's engineering, it's not science. What we did is we built the model based only on empirical information of how the various ganglia are wired up together, and where we didn't know it, we just tried a number of different ones. The one remarkable thing here is, there we go, is that for all these pairs of different patterns, whatever model we used, each dot here is one pair of patterns. Each different color is a slightly different type of wiring up the neurons where we have some unknowns. For all these pairs, the model performs even better than the real bees. And so with these models that are so simple as to be caricatures of the wiring diagram that really exists in a bee's visual system, we get better performance than the real bees. And this is something that we're seeing over and over again. We build these really simple models that are not tweaked to deliver anything at all, and we get a lot more out than we put in. So emergence, I think, is everything. So fairly complex patterns can be stored with very simple feature detectors. You do not need, for, let's say, flower shape recognition, necessarily any kind of mental representation. So here we're going at that question in a slightly different way. We're asking if the bees can recognize shapes in a different sensory modality to the one that they've learned it in. And so the task is very simple. A bee has to learn to associate either balls or cubes, depending on which groups they're in, with reward. But they can't touch these shapes. Okay? They just see them through a plexiglass lid. One of them has sugar water, the other doesn't. And we're then asking, can the bees recognize the same shapes by touch alone, without seeing the shapes? And so the question is actually very simple to the old, perhaps now extinct, birthday party game where you're asking the kids to, they're either blindfolded or they reach into a bag without looking, and they have to identify the spoon, the key, the screwdriver, or some such object just by touch. Okay, they've previously only seen it, now they have to feel their way for it. And the point there is, the sensory input is of course completely different. You can't find the correct object in that dark bag without somehow picturing the item that you have in mind. And so that's what we did here. We asked the same bees after they'd learned to identify the correct shape using vision to see if they could identify the same shape under infrared light by touch alone. And indeed, this bee trained getting rewards on balls also finds these by just touching them. And of course, you can do the reverse. You can train the bees in darkness, complete darkness under infrared light again, and then see if they can subsequently find the correct shape. So here she is getting rewarded on the cube by touch alone. And then we're facing the bee with this object and another one which they've previously only touched, the balls here. And you can see she looks at the balls, she rejects it, and then flies back to the cube. So if you train them in darkness, they can find the correct objects by vision. That indeed indicates to us, at least, that there must be some sort of mental representation of the relevant shape. Now, the other thing, in addition to recognizing flowers and manipulating objects, that bees have to be good at is spatial navigation. So they have a home, a central place to which they must return, and I've deliberately chosen this fairly foggy landscape in central Mexico near my second home. There was a feral honeybee nest in the tree over there. I don't think you can really see a tree there, but neither can the bees very easily. And so if your home is here, you have to find perhaps a good nectar patch back behind that hill over there, or a pollen patch that's over here. There are thousands of trees in this area, all looking very similar, lots of aliasing. There are even lots of hills that look similar. If you try hiking in a landscape like that, it's very, very tough. It's very, very easy to get lost. This is you down there. Try to find your particular tree 5 kilometers away under these foggy conditions. Not trivial, yet bees have to do it all the time. And that's obviously not a small task when you have a brain the size of a pinhead. So the way we study bees' navigation is with this kind of equipment called harmonic radar, where the bottom dish emits a signal that's picked up by this so-called transponder. It's not a transmitter because bees can't carry anything battery-powered, which bounces back the signal at a different frequency, which subsequently gets picked up by the top dish here, and so we can track the bees while they're navigating in various tasks. And the idea, because this radar now at least partially works in 3 dimensions, is that we can't just track where the bee is, but the dream is ultimately that we want to find out what the bee sees while she's flying. And so this is simulated here. This is actually a honeybee drone flight, and you can see its boomerang-shaped eyes. You can see that the pixelation is quite coarse-grained. The bee's visual spatial resolution is relatively poor, but they can compensate to some extent with rapid eye movements and saccades because they can process information much more rapidly than we can, and in that way compensate for poor spatial vision. So here's one of the many tasks that we put our bees through. It's a traveling salesman problem. And this problem, as the name suggests, even if you haven't been exposed to it before, quite obviously is if you are a traveling salesman and you want to, let's say, visit 5 cities in the course of the day to visit all the bookshops of a particular chain, then you want to do that in a way that minimizes travel distance and expenditure. And that's a challenge that's very natural to a bee because they can't typically fill up their tummies at just one flower, so they have to visit multiple in sequence to fill up once. And so they face exactly that challenge to find, first of all, locate all the feeding stations, the flowers, and then to find a route that's optimal. And so here's a simple version of that traveling salesman problem for a bee. Here's the hive. Here are 5 feeding stations. And here's an early route. This is a relatively inexperienced bee. And you can see there's still quite a bit of exploration. In this figure and the following ones, green is always early, orange is in the middle, and red is late in this bout. But if we do this multiple times, we're following the same individual now for dozens of foraging flights as she's exploring this setup. So she's now found 2 of these locations. Where up here is the bout counter. She's now found the second 2 and now the 5th one. So this is the 8th flight now, and you can see there's still quite a bit of exploration going on outside this area. But the bee gets better and better. The path becomes ever more streamlined until indeed at the end she's found the optimum track and then largely sticks with it with still some exploration, but she's definitely found the optimum at this stage. Now, another question that we asked of our bees is, if we do not set you any challenges at all, what do you do with your life? And so the idea there was to track individual bees through their entire lifetimes, from their maiden flight, the first time they ever leave the native nest, to their death, basically. They only live for a few weeks. And so what we're seeing here is a bee's maiden flight, the first time that she's ever left the hive and exploring her environment, sped up 130 times. And what you can see, so here's the hive, is that the bee flies, explores in various directions, always coming back to the vicinity of the nest without entering it, just checking back, where am I? Okay, my hive's here, fly out in a different direction. The loops always go in new directions, so she seems to know, I've been there already, I don't need to explore there again. Then she comes back and explores in a different direction. One thing that's of interest is that during one of these flights, the bee visits a forest edge up here and then returns back, and that will become of interest in a little while. On the second day, again, green is early, orange middle, red late. On the second day, the bee makes one more flight. We're now following her for multiple days and several dozen foraging bouts. She makes one more exploratory loop in a southwesterly direction, and then she's discovered something. So by this forest edge up here, she's found a patch that's clearly valuable. And once she's got that, she just sticks with it. Like an assembly line worker goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So her brief phase of exploration on day one has now ceased, and she's just switching to patch exploitation entirely. And then the bee was stuck inside for a few days because it was raining. Then she came out again on day 11. Initially, again, green is early here. Initially, she flies to a patch by this forest edge that she has visited several days already and exploited that. And then at some point during an outbound flight to this patch, she appears to change her mind, and without retracing her steps back to the hive, flies to this patch in a straight line without actually having, so she hasn't visited that patch since her very first flight ever. And so she appears to retrieve that distant memory for another patch and flies straight there. Now, this is entirely observational, of course. It's deliberately not an experimental study, but if we're asking questions of whether these animals might have cognitive maps, then this kind of retrieval of distant memories and flying there without actually retracing your steps along familiar routes, of course, is crucial. Now, one of the things that when I've discussed my work with colleagues working with sort of classic icons of animal intelligence, primates, corvid birds, and so on, they've always said, well, okay, bees have to be good at learning colors and navigating, because that's what a bee does on a day-to-day basis. So they're pre-programmed to be good at these things. But what about real intelligence, like challenges that they don't face on a day-to-day basis? And so here's an experiment where we took up that challenge, where we trained bees from a hive over here to fly along a series of 3 landmarks and then collect some food. And after the bees had learned this, we then produced contradictions between the correct distance, which we know, of course, bees can remember, and the correct number of landmarks, by either inserting more landmarks over the same distance or fewer, as the case may be. And it turned out that if we had more landmarks over the same distance, then bees tended to land earlier as a group. Whereas if we reduced the number of landmarks, the bees would tend to overshoot their target and fly further than their actual training distance. So there clearly was a sensitivity to number. I don't know if many of you are indeed American. You might know Dave Barry. He writes wonderfully about all kinds of things. And here's an article by him in the Washington Post journal. And he observes that so the scientists whose names are Lars and Carl set up various landmarks between a beehive and a bee feeder, and so on and so on. The surprising result, Lars and Carl were both killed by eyeball stings. No, seriously, they discovered that the bees were locating the feeder by counting the landmarks. Yes, bees can count. This means that bees, in terms of math skills, are ahead of most American high school graduates. Actually, my publisher forced me to take that statement out of my book, even though it was an American comedian making it, but there you go. So what we've done more recently is done such counting experiments in laboratory settings. I don't know to what extent this is probably a bit hard to follow, but the idea simply is in this experiment to distinguish 2 from 4. And over a sequence of trials, the bees get exposed to different patterns, different arrangements of dots with different shapes and so on, different sizes, because obviously you want to disentangle numerosity from overall stimulus size and so on. And we then present bees with various tests where they're now faced with, in this transfer test, for example, with patterns which contain the correct number, but in different colors, with patterns that they haven't seen before, and ask, can they still recognize the arrangement with the correct numbers, irrespective of color? And here's one such test where the bees have previously only been exposed to yellow things. Here's the bee walking around, not quite sure what to do yet. You can see, so this bee needs to find 2 over 4. Now she counts 1, 2, 3, ticks them off. If it's 3, it can't be the right one. Here again, she looked at 3, left it, and now she's clearly interested in the 2. And here again, so we're counting we're measuring the time that they spend hovering in front of these patterns. And the bee consistently favors the 2 over the 4 in this case. So impressive though that may be, how difficult is it actually computationally? I don't know if any one of you guys have tried, but it turns out that it's actually spectacularly cheap to generate a neural network that counts to 4, as in this case. So Vera Vajash built this model, which is basically, again, inspired loosely by what we know about the insect visual system. There is basically a brightness neuron, a working memory neuron that counts up numerosity, and another working memory neuron that measures brightness in the scene. And the crucial thing is, as in the video we've just seen, so bees do not seem to be able to do their counting simultaneously, even for small numbers. They need to tick off items sequentially. And that's the trick with this model. So it requires that the bee goes over these items one after another. With this simple circuit, you can solve the task with just a 4-neuron network. That's all it takes. So impressive though that may be, it is actually neither computationally difficult, nor is it likely to be difficult to evolve. Now, what you need, of course, in addition, is your whole motor circuit that programs your visual flight behavior, the scanning and so on, but the counting itself is easy. All right, let's see if the audio works now. I'll play you a little film.
We've recently discovered something even more surprising about insects. It turns out that some are really, really smart. One test of intelligence in animals is when they're given a problem, they can work out a solution in their heads. Hang a piece of food from a perch, out of reach, and a smart bird like a raven soon works out what to do. Just pull the string, hold it with your foot, pull a bit more, and in no time at all, you have a snack. Yet anything a mere vertebrate can do. Bumblebees can also do this, even though they must be trained to solve the problem. Pull the string and reach a reward of nectar. Now, this bee hasn't been trained at all. But if she's allowed to watch her nestmate solving the problem, she knows exactly what to do when she gets her turn. Teachers and students, and all with brains only the size of pinheads. Combine this with the flexibility of the basic insect layout, and there's not much that insects can't do.
Yeah, so what you can do with these kinds of social learning paradigms is you can observe through this social learning how a skill like that spreads through a population. In a similar way as people analyzing social media networks look at how a new meme spreads, who invented it, how quickly is it copied, and so on. We can do that for this kind of special skill for a bee colony as well. So what you can see here is all the bees of one colony arranged in a circle. Each dot is one bee. And the moment that a line forms between two dots, that's an interaction between two individual bees. And our yellow 31 was the original innovator, the bee that solved the task first. And all the other ones are bees that had the potential to learn it from her. And you can see there's now a whole bunch of colored dots. Whenever a dot turns colored, that means that bee has now learned the technique as well. She can pull a string as well. And all these orange bees on the right side here, these are individuals that have picked up the task from this yellow 31. You can now see there are a few more colors here, purple individuals, and these are bees that have no longer picked up the task from yellow 31, but from the orange bees. So there are several sequential sets of learners, generations if you wish, although these are not, of course, biological generations. But the task even continues to spread through the colony beyond the life of the original yellow 31, the first innovator. So they live only a few weeks, but the point here is that there is a unique skill to that group of bees that only that colony can do, and the skill continues to be maintained in the colony and even spreads to more and more individuals. Now, why am I interested in studying these culture-like phenomena? You might know that a variety of social insects, of course, can do fairly impressive things compared to, well, most other non-insect animals, with the exception of us humans. So you find these multi-story architectures, such as this termite mound, the spectacularly regular honeybee comb architecture, habits like growing a fungus and feeding it with leaves and so on. And we're all taught in the textbooks that impressive though these sort of social insect organizations might be, we're taught that these are all the result of evolutionary trial and error processes, that there is no component of intelligence, but that all of this is simply innate behavior and always was innate. And maybe that's the case today with many of these behavioral innovations. But what I'm curious about, given how easy it is to spread new skills, wholly novel skills in insect populations, is it perhaps plausible that at their roots, many of these behaviors might have resulted from individual innovations and subsequently spread, initially at least, by social learning and copying principles, as we've just seen. And so we do a number of experiments on this topic. So what you can see here is, in this case with the string pulling, of course, there's only one way of solving the task. Here are two different ones. I don't know if we could have the lights down a slight bit. So in this case, there is a reward presented here where this yellow disc is, and there are two ways of getting to it. Either you rotate the blue lid until you've reached the yellow target, or you rotate it clockwise using the red lid. Both are possible. Bees are allowed to use both. And what happens actually, so this is the design again, so you've got these puzzle boxes where the reward is here under a transparent lid, and you either push blue or you push red. Both are allowed. And so here, each bar is for one colony of bees. And you can see how many individuals in each colony used which technique. And so in this colony B1, the vast majority of individuals, red was tried, but mostly they're choosing blue. And this is also the case in this colony. Control colonies didn't figure it out at all in this case. The red-seeded colonies where the first individual chose to push red, the vast majority of them chose red. And this also works over longer periods. So whatever is discovered first is maintained in that population, so to speak. If you seed a colony with two demonstrators, one of which always pushes blue, the other always pushes red, So initially, they have the opportunity to observe both, and you can see here what happens over time. So over the course of 12 days, initially, blue and red are about equally popular, but over time, one variant always dominates. Invariably, the dynamics are such that in the end, one variant wins. With this colony here, they started with one red and one blue pusher, but after just a few days, there was only ever blue tried. So there is, again, a culture-like phenomenon where you have social dynamics which result in either one or the other technique being dominant. We even found out, this is coming out next week in Nature. Here, this is a two-step puzzle box where you first have to move the blue lid out of the way before you can move the red one to get to the yellow dot. So it's a two-action puzzle box. And it turns out that with this technique, this is too difficult for any bee ever to innovate alone. They can only learn it socially. And in that sense, this cumulative element of having one technique that's socially learned built on another technique that's also socially learned was hitherto regarded to be a unique element of human culture. But there you go, you find it in bees. Now for the next experiment, I'll let Jane Goodall do the introduction.
The most recent example which blows people's minds is the bumblebee. And the bumblebee has been taught to roll a little ball. He rolls it backwards. He rolls the little ball until he can push it down, or maybe she, I don't know, into a hole, like a goal. And as soon as this little ball gets into the goal, the bumblebee is given a little drop of nectar as a reward. So they learn to do this. But the mind-blowing thing is other bumblebees who've merely watched a taught bumblebee can do the same without being taught, just by watching. And that is supposed to be a mark of very superior intelligence. So this is something we're learning all the time. We have been far too arrogant. The animal kingdom of which we are a part is filled with secrets. And gosh, I'd love to be young and learning about these things now, because all the doors are wide open and you never know what you're going to find.
Yeah, so for me, this was very moving because Jane Goodall was one of my inspirations to go into animal behavior in the first place back in the dawn of time. And for her to even notice our work, normally the primate people ignore us. But for her to notice it and to say, hey, I'd like to be young now and study bees was quite a thrill. So yeah, let me explain this task in a bit more detail because it's actually important. What we've seen so far with all these social learning experiments, of course, was just a correct copying of a technique without any kind of improvement. But this task actually allows for, it has room for improvement, as they say. So here is the goal area in the center, and there are 3 balls now. And obviously, the best way to get the task done, if you understand that you want to get a ball into the center, is to pick the closest ball, right? However, this bee knows that that won't work because this ball and that ball are actually glued firmly to the surface. That bee knows that, she's tried, but she's learned I can't move these balls. And so the only ball that she ever does move is the one that's furthest away. And there she goes. And once that ball is in the center, the experienced individual as well as the naive observer both get a big drop of sugar water. And so, crucially, this observer has never rolled balls for reward before, right? So she's entirely naive. And she observes this 3 times, and we then ask the observer, hey, how would you solve the task? And the trick now is that in this case, she really has the option to pick any ball she wants because they're now no longer glued down. And the critical question now is, does that observer bee merely ape the demonstrator, copies the action that she has seen the demonstrator perform and pick the furthest ball, or does she actually pick the one that's closest to the target? And she picks the closest one. You can see that she's very clumsy because she actually hasn't got any practice with rolling balls before, but now she gets her reward again. So she's quite wobbly with that ball, but the point is that she is not just copying actions as demonstrated to her, but she solves the task spontaneously in a better way than was demonstrated to her, which to us indicates that there is some sort of understanding of the desired end state of the task, rather than just copying actions. And after we did all of that work, of course, a natural next question for Samadhi Galpayaga was, do they actually like to roll balls all over the place? And it turns out that they do. So in this study, we never gave the bees an appetitive reward anywhere near the balls. They had free access to food elsewhere, but nonetheless, they chose to go out of their way to get access to these balls, which they seem to like rolling all over the place. As you also find with many other animal species, young bees were much more likely to roll balls and roll them for extended periods. Perhaps also, unsurprisingly, males did the ball rolling a lot more than the females did, which in part might have to do something with the fact that males are completely useless for any work in the colony. So they don't bring back any nectar, they don't do any construction, nothing. So they have a lot more time on their hands, and so if you give them balls, then that's what they do. No. Let's see if this works. Now, what we really want to do, of course. It doesn't play. But you can sort of imagine what's going on here. What we really want to do is see if we can replace the hopeless England team with a group of bumblebees and see if they can do better. Yeah, so I want to finish up with an early outlook on how wonderful the bee's brain is. And of course, all of these abilities that I have just described to you must in some way be underpinned by this microcomputer that is the bee's brain. And the complexity, the marvelousness of it was actually recognized quite early on by Ramon y Cajal, who wrote the following when he compared bee brains with those of fish and so on. The excellence of a psychic machine does not increase with zoological hierarchy. Instead, one realizes that in fish and amphibians, the nervous centers have undergone an unexpected simplification. Of course, their gray matter has increased considerably in mass, but when the structure of their brains is compared with that of bees or dragonflies, they're excessively plain, coarse, and rudimentary. Sorry, fish people. I don't know if... It is as if one were to pretend to hold as equals the merits of a rough grandfather clock with the quality of a fine pocket watch, a marvel of fineness, delicacy, and precision. As always, in building her marvelous works, nature distinguishes herself much more in her tiny creations than in the large. This down here is actually a drawing by Ramon y Cajal of the bee's visual system with the lamina, medulla, and lobula, of which we've heard earlier, and it's actually spectacular in its correct recognition classification of several identified neuron types that we still recognize today. So, in conclusion, I think there is good evidence for more than just associative learning, for the idea that indeed there are sort of mental representations of space and of things and number. There is, at least at a bare bones level, simple tool use, object manipulation in a manner that is not based on anything that bees do naturally, with, we think, some sort of awareness of the possible outcomes of their own actions. And these, to me, are key ingredients of a mind, at least a bare bones mind, so to speak. So I think there is a recognition, for me at least, that we are thinking and feeling and enjoying and suffering beings in a world of other thinking, enjoying and suffering beings, however different these other minds may be. Now, how do you implement all of this at a neural level? I have no idea. So the one thing that was noticeable with all our little dabblings with computational neuroscience that we did is that even the simplest models always pop out a lot more than you actually put in. And of course, once we or my colleagues in Janelia Farm and so on have the actual connectome of a wonderful insect like a bumblebee, not just Drosophila, I mean, come on. And with some idea of how these neurons all talk to each other, in a 1 million neuron bee brain, we might get some reasonable idea of how you actually get a microbrain to think. All right, thank you very much for your attention. Sure.
That would be really helpful. Yes? I've got a question.
Throw them. Meanwhile, if anyone would like a signed copy of the book, I've got a few that I brought with me.
All right. Okay, you're going. Okay, good. The microphone's coming to you.
How are we doing out there?
Hello.
Who's in charge?
Hi.
All right.
Thank you very much for the amazing talk. I don't have a neuroscience question because everything was very clear. I'm now reading this amazing book called How to Speak Whale, which made the amazing point that by understanding whale behavior, we can make huge changes to conservation and protection of these animals. And I'm wondering now, by understanding how to speak bees, can you think of conservation and protection effort policy changes that we can get through?
Possibly. I mean, the bees have one of the most remarkable communication system anywhere in the animal kingdom by way of the so-called dance language, which allows them to use symbols to communicate about spatial positions. But that's been known a while, and to my knowledge, it hasn't actually inspired bees to dedicate, inspired people to dedicate more to efforts to bee conservation. I think in general, there is now a relatively widespread appreciation that we need to conserve bees because they do something useful for us. They pollinate our crops and our pretty garden flowers. But that's an argument from utility. It's an argument based on, well, they're useful, so those insects we'll let live and we can get rid of all the other ones maybe. So that I don't think is quite the right approach. And I think that this insight, I had talked, the joy of ball rolling aside, very little about sentience, but I and some other not entirely crazy people do think that there is at least reasonable evidence for the capacity to feel, including pain-like states, anxiety and so on in a variety of insects. And I think that insight, of course, adds a wholly different angle to conservation efforts, because if you think about the efforts that humans make for saving Siberian tigers and panda bears and so on, they are motivated to a large extent by empathy, by some sort of sense that these animals must suffer from the deterioration of their habitats, from the difficulty of finding mates and food. And this empathy makes us donate and so on. And I don't think people have that appreciation yet for invertebrates, but it's perhaps something worth considering, because the nice thing with bees is that actually everyone can do something, and that's plant the right kinds of flowers. Don't put any honeybee hives because they're domesticated animals, and leave a bit of a mess in your garden or in your balcony for the insects to find a home. So I don't have an overview about
over here on your right.
Okay.
Right.
So
here, over
okay.
here. Yeah. Thanks for the great talk. I have a question related to the exploration and exploitation when they find rewards. Have you observed more complicated behaviors rather than, search this place and then search another place, find some reasonable reward and keep exploiting any other behaviors like doing a bandit problem or more complicated reinforcement learning setting of exploration together with exploitation and going through the process to maximize the total reward? Because that may lead to a closer mind to ourselves to chasing for the much larger cumulative reward in total.
Yeah, so I mean, I've shown you the career of a very Protestant bee that that had very little early exploration and then just worked. In this case, on 2 different locations. There is huge inter-individual variation, and there are some bees that never stop exploring. Most are somewhere in between, and that they'll intermittently, let's say one patch fades, intersperse further exploration and then with more exploitation, but there are some bees that just explore forever. And so you find a whole range, and of course it's quite easy to see how having a mixture of these different personality types in a colony, in a social context, can be beneficial depending on what the conditions are. Under some conditions, you might be fairly fine with just individuals that work hard on familiar things, whereas in other scenarios, more highly variable ones, more ephemeral resources where you need more individuals that engage in exploration.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for this very cool talk. I guess I had kind of a question about, the notion of convergent evolution of intelligence, because obviously the bee brain is a completely different layout from mammals and birds and so on. And really, the ability to use all of these fantastic, highly advanced aspects of cognition is just, nature's found more than one way to do it. And so I guess I was just wondering if from your work you've kind of abstracted out what you would see as, maybe like principles of nature as they relate to intelligence across different kinds of anatomical layouts.
So, you're undoubtedly right that any intelligent behavior that we find in the insects must be convergently evolved in its entirety to anything that we see in the vertebrates, because the last common ancestor of the vertebrate and invertebrate lines, I think we can confidently declare would have been unable to do any such things. But of course, many of the molecular key ingredients, transmitters, their receptors, channel molecules, and so on, they're fairly ancient. So these building blocks could have been used for a variety of things. But beyond that, I think the level of convergence is fairly deep. So you start from entirely different lines of brain evolutions in these 2 clades. So everything is entirely distinct and differently evolved. But in the kinds of circuits that you find, so for example, the fan-out, fan-in architecture that you see in the mushroom bodies, as a means to ensure specificity and a large hard drive, so to speak, That, of course, you find in cephalopods as well, and you find it in vertebrates as well. So many of these ideas for how to build brains, nature has come up with more than once.
Hi. Hello? Oh, hi. Thank you for this. I'm successfully evangelized on bees. I have a question about learning in bees. So you mentioned that bees have this sort of dance language that they're using to convey locations in space, right? And to me, location or language implies clearly some sort of abstract representation. The videos you showed with the bees learning to do a task, to me that looked a lot more like monkey see, monkey do. Like, you know, that bee did this, I do this. How can we tell that there's teaching involved? Does that make sense?
There isn't. So with these investigations, there was no active investment of skilled individuals to pass on the information. It was just other individuals scrounging on both the efforts and the skills of the bees that they observed. Now, we did have an experiment where we quite deliberately faced the bee, as you might remember with the ball rolling experiments, to either copy or do something better than the observed skilled bee. So it wasn't a little more than monkey see, monkey do. The one example that is well documented where knowledgeable individuals actively invest time and efforts into passing on information is indeed in the honeybee dance, where knowledgeable individuals sometimes will spend minutes to just pass on information and nothing but. So with these studies, we have no indication yet anyway that there is an active passing on of skills, that the demonstrators would do anything differently when there's an observer rather than not. But Olli Lukula, one of the postdocs who worked with me on this, is now exploring whether there's active cooperation between bees in tasks where it actually requires more than one individual. So watch this space. It seems that there is, and in that case, there seems to be also an investment into getting other bees to help with the task, but we don't have or I don't know at what stage he is at currently. Mm-hmm.
Sorry. I have actually. Hi. I actually have a more detailed question and a more broad question. Here.
All right.
Yeah, I hijacked the microphone. So the more detailed question is, I wonder how accurate the bees can count, because my impression is that ChatGPT don't really count very well. Like if you ask ChatGPT to generate a figure with 3 people, it might give you 4. So I wonder, can bees like count quite accurately, or they like differentiate just between more or less?
Well, more or less is actually more difficult. So you can train them to count individual items up to about 4, and at that level with a precision of 4 versus 5 or 4 versus 3. And of course, multiples of that quantity as well. So if you can do 3 versus 4, you can do 6 versus 8 at roughly the same level of accuracy, but not 7 versus 8. So the numbers where they're good are quite small, but they have that in common with many other animals that have been tested for their counting abilities. Training bees to learn rules such as more than or less than, of course, actually also works, but it's harder because you then have to train them through multiple different comparisons where, let's say, the smaller of 2 quantities is always rewarded, but that rewarded quantity can sometimes be 1, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. The bee needs to learn, I always have to pick the smaller number depending on what's currently on display. But they also can learn such rules. So Martin Djurfa and Aurora Vargas-Weber in Toulouse have shown exactly that.
Oh, thank you. I have another more broad question, which is, I wonder, do you think like animals that have social behaviors, like I guess bees or crows, are generally more smart? Like I don't know if there's like such maybe empirical trend.
You might think that, and with certain kinds of tasks, including the dance language, that is certainly something that occurs, is firmly embedded in the social context. With other aspects, so if you think about the thousands of solitary bee species that also exist out there, so there are a lot of bee species that are basically just single mothers, where one female builds a nest and maintains it and feeds her young. They're also central place foragers. They also navigate territories of several square kilometers, and their spatial memory has to be as good, if not better, because the loss, if that single mother fails to come home, her entire offspring dies. To a colony, a honeybee colony with 60,000 workers, if one individual is lost, that's bad for that individual, but the colony can probably cope with it. So the pressure there is very strong. The ability to locate the most rewarding flowers is also, of course, shared between social and solitary bees. So I'd be careful. There's very little in terms of difference in gross neuroanatomy between solitary and social bee species. And indeed, for example, I showed this string pulling task. After that was published, someone sent me a little video from a mason bee that nests in a brick, in a hole in a brick, and someone had pushed a nail into the hole. And what happened was that the bee landed on the nail, and rather than just stupidly trying to push past it, to me, I mean, it's a social media video, so you don't know what the background is, but it looked as if that bee knew that pushing won't do anything, so she tried everything possible to pull the nail, including standing on the nail and whirring her wings to generate some thrust away from the wall and such things. But the idea was actually similar to the string pulling task, except it's not an experiment, but just someone's cute social media video. But yeah, so it needs to be tested. I think it's intuitive that certain aspects of bees' intelligence, where their social bees is linked to their sociality, many other aspects, maybe not.
Hi, thanks for the great talk. It seems to me that a lot of the innate intelligent behaviors of the bees are kind of cooperative. Like, for example, building the hive requires like a lot of them to work together. But a lot of the problems that you showed were kind of an individual bee solving a problem. I'm wondering, first of all, did you look at problems that require cooperation of two or more bees? And in particular, I'd be curious to know whether the kind of collaborative problem that they converge on would change as you swap bees out one at a time. To me, that seems something like a cultural change, because each bee could influence the different dimensions of the task that they're responsible for, but at the end of the day, they all have to work together. So yeah, curious, have you looked at this?
So we haven't confronted, in my lab, bees with non-natural tasks on which they cooperate, but Olli Lukala is doing just that in Finland now, where, well, these are variations of the string pulling tasks, but physically it's arranged in such a way that it requires multiple individuals to help each other. Of course, many of the nest building activities that you see in social insects are commonly regarded as innate and not requiring any cognition, but I actually doubt that. So there are fantastic observations from François Hubert, about 2 centuries old, where he faced bees with various unconventional challenges in their nest construction activity. For example, putting obstacles into ongoing constructions and see how bees coped with building their way around the obstacles, which are fantastic investigations into bees' flexibility there, which seem to indicate, so far as we can tell from 2 centuries difference, some sort of planning ability. But of course, he didn't look at which individuals did which. And so that remains to be done.
Hi, thank you. I also liked the teaching paradigm, and I think it's really cool that when a bee watches another bee successfully solve a problem, then that bee can also do it faster. I was wondering if the watcher bee can learn from watching unsuccessful attempts as well, like if it has some set of strategies that it might want to try, but if it observes some of those strategies be unsuccessful, can it use that information and then prioritize others? So like, can it learn from failed attempts, of watching failed attempts in addition to watching successful attempts? Thank you.
So we didn't do that with the string pulling, but we did an experiment where we actually, so normally individual bees are not that different from each other, so individuals will probably have a hard time recognizing one another individually. But in one experiment, we simply marked certain individuals with colored dots and others with different colored dots. And we basically set up the scenario in such a way that some individuals were good demonstrators and others were bad demonstrators. So that what some individuals showed always led to a rewarding flower type, whereas some other individuals marked with a different color had poor value at predicting the reward in the flowers. And bees did indeed not just learn to identify the right individuals from whom to pick up the information, but they actually shunned the individuals with whom they had the experience that, look, this sister is not ever showing me anything that's useful. And so yes, in this particular case where we highlighted individual differences between bees, they were actually not just able to identify what is a good individual to follow, but also which ones are should be ignored, basically.
Thank you so much, Lars.
All right.
Please join me in thanking our speaker. All right, and let's take the remainder of the buzz and take it to the poster session.